DeepWatch helps secure the digital economy by protecting and defending enterprise networks everywhere, every day. DeepWatch leverages its highly automated cloud-based SOC platform backed by a world-class team of experts who monitor, detect, and respond to threats on customers' digital assets 24/7, 365. Many of the world's leading brands rely on DeepWatch's managed detection and response. Visit securityweekly.com/DeepWatch to learn more. Can your incident response technology collect from off-network endpoints? Xterra FTK Enterprise can. Endpoints are no longer located in a physical office, and organizations need a comprehensive investigation tool that enables holistic data collection and review. With FTK Enterprise, you can also scan for IOCs and MISP indicators. You can scan with Yara rules, and you can use integrations to trigger automatic endpoint collections. Visit securityweekly.com/Xterra for access to their white paper, Incident Response for a Remote World.
Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Help Systems helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements to the next level by pairing with Cobalt Strike, a threat emulation tool ideal for adversary simulations and red team operations. Learn more at securityweekly.com/core security.
Welcome back to RSA Conference 2022. It's day 3. We're still recording live at the Marriott Marquis. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment is Joe Payne. He is President and CEO at Code 42. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about insider risk management. Before we get into the details, what's the difference between insider risk management and insider threat? Because they sound very similar, don't they?
Yeah, it's the first question everybody always asks. And the term insider risk management, by the way, has been coined by Gartner in the last few months to define the whole category. We've been using it at Code 42 for a couple of years because insider risk is more comprehensive than insider threat. And so when we're talking about insiders, first of all, most organizations don't want to think of their own employees as threats. And so it's a little bit of a kinder and gentler way. But it also encompasses the unintentional risk that employees often create when they move data where they're not supposed to use it. So as an example, sometimes employees do things like, hey, I used my personal email because I couldn't get into the corporate system and I needed to send this thing on a weekend and that's the only thing I had access to. Or I used my Dropbox account because I didn't know how to use our OneDrive account and I needed to share this with my team. And, you know, a lot of security teams would say, okay, is that a threat, from that senior manager, or was that just them putting our data at risk because they were trying to get their job done?
Right.
And so the risk really encompasses all the activity that an organization may see with regards to data, not just the ones that are malicious.
Got it. Because there's also been a lot of movement around human risk management, which plays into this a little bit. There are riskier employees in an organization. And when you understand behaviors and you understand where that risky population is, then you can do things like training and create policies and other things around that risky population. And, and I imagine there's a correlation between insider risk and this kind of human risk element that actually allow you to make changes to policies so that you reduce that overall risk.
Well, you've identified something that's a super important part of insider risk, which is the education component. This is one of those areas in security where you really need to take a comprehensive program view towards your employees. And just in the same way the spam market really relies on educating employees what not to click on and how to handle spam. In this market, you'd be surprised how little employees know about what they're allowed to do with their data. So many software developers think, for example, when they leave a job, they can take all their source code with them. They wrote it, they're leaving a copy behind the company's using, but they wrote their source code, so it's their source code, so they can take it. So they have to be educated that no, you can't do that. Salespeople often take their pipeline from Salesforce.com. They're not allowed to do that. So the education component is super important. And sometimes the education component is as simple as, okay, you shared that document in OneDrive and you publicly shared it. You should have privately shared it, and the security team can course correct that using education components that at Code 42 we've actually started offering the market because it's such an important part of what we do.
Exactly right. Yeah, and the training is an important component, right? And I see the human risk management component coming out of the security awareness and training for that reason, right? Because it's tied to the training programs and identifying risky. But the data here also plays into that risk calculation because it's actually looking at activity and what they're doing with data.
That's right.
That influences other human risk elements that would then also impact awareness and training.
Well, that's a big change that we've also brought to the market in terms of at Code 42, we're looking for data that's moved to untrusted locations. And so we're looking for actual events that happen. Hey, someone moved something to Dropbox. Someone put something on using AirDrop on a personal device. Someone emailed themselves a document because they wanted to keep it. And by the way, that's the number one way people take data today is they upload it via browser to their Gmail while they're sitting off the network, and they mail it to themselves, and then they have it forever. So that kind of kind of activity happens all the time, and it's a huge part of the equation. Now, when you think about what a UEBA does, a UEBA looks for risky activity, risky human behavior, and then says, did something happen? Are those people threats? Are they risks? We've turned that on its head and said, no, let's look for actual exfiltration. And then let's paint things against those events that we know about those people. So, for example, if Matt moves something to Dropbox, well, is Matt a departing employee? Does Matt have privileged access? Has Matt ever used Dropbox before?
Right.
These are all things that help determine whether that's a really risky activity or just a slightly risky activity. If you're leaving the company and you move something to Dropbox and it's the first time you've ever used Dropbox, that's something I'm going to want to investigate.
Right.
If you're a longtime employee that uses Dropbox and we've seen it before and, we don't have any other indications, then maybe that's a low risk activity, and maybe we just send you an email with a video showing you how you use OneDrive instead of Dropbox. Right. So again, that human element is really important, but it's in the context and insider risk management of an event that actually happened. And that's important for security people because the UEBAs of the world have created so many false positives and so much noise that we only want to bring these things up when someone has actually done something.
Right. Yeah, you want that evidence that something happened, because otherwise you have the SOC analyst chasing around a bunch of alerts that may or may not be malicious, maybe completely normal. So how does the technology work? Is it because I've seen some different data security products out there, because the challenge here is once it's out, is it out forever? Can you get it back? So talk to me about how you monitor and track the data. Can you get it back? Can you deny access to the data once it leaves? Like, how does this actually work?
So that brings up a really good point about like what we're trying to achieve and why IRM is so different than DLP. And in the DLP world, and I would describe that as a bit of a fantasy world. What you're trying to do is make sure you keep everything in and that you lock everything down and you keep people from, sharing data. But in today's business world, most CIOs have deployed digitization strategies and collaboration strategies. We've put out Slack and Teams and Zoom and OneDrive and Box and Salesforce and Snowflake, and we've put all these cloud applications and all this collaboration technology. We want people to share data.
Right.
We want them to collaborate. We want them to be, I've got something I want to share with finance or HR or legal, and I want to do this collaboration. And that's where the DLP systems have really failed. They were written 20 years ago. They were written pre-cloud, and they were written with collaboration not being the focus of an organization.
Right.
And so what we have come in with IRM, it's us, it's Microsoft, it's a few other smaller players, have come in and said, look, We want to enable collaboration. We want everyone to share data freely with trusted locations. And then we want to say, if something goes outside a trusted location, let's score it, let's flag it, and let's determine if we need to do an investigation. And then we've made it really easy to do an investigation like in seconds so that you can solve the situation when it happens. And so one way to think about this is, in the course of a day, we might have 200,000-300,000 successful shares. And then we might have a few exfiltrations that we need to deal with. A DLP would say, block all those shares, block all that collaboration, because we don't want those 2 or 3 things to happen. And in the course of that, they make the whole company frustrated, angry, inefficient. And what the company does is they just go around those controls. They find a different way to do it. And so those controls are meaningless in the first place. So coming full circle to your question, no, we let data flow freely. And then what we do is, by catching it right when it happens, it's really easy to get that data back and easy to create consequences for the individual if they take it. So let me give you a really specific example. We have a customer who recently is in a trial for our product, and they had a financial services organization, and they saw a software developer taking source code in their last week on the job. Now, they came back to us and said that was $5 million of source code.
Wow.
That individual took. And by catching the individual, they sit down and they have the conversation. Why are you doing this? What's going on? To explain. Maybe there's a real business reason behind it. There wasn't. The person was leaving. They thought they were allowed to take their source code. The company said, okay, you're going to return that source code. We're going to look at your device, make sure that we have it all back. And if we're not satisfied with your responses, we'll be notifying your next employer that you may have that source code, and then now they're on the hook. In the course of explaining that to the employee, the hands start shaking. You're going to tell my next employer that I stole source code from you? So they do everything they can to return that source code, to make sure they don't have any copies, and make you satisfied, because nobody wants their next employer informed that they remove data from their current employer, because that's too risky for you to bring a new person in. So what I described to you, we see constantly within our customer base, and that particular example is, CrowdStrike's one of our best customers at Code 42, and Tim Briggs is the head of insider risk over at CrowdStrike, and he says to me, Joe, whenever we have that conversation, we get that data back.
Interesting.
So, but in the meantime, what's really important to understand is, in the meantime, they enable collaboration throughout their whole organization, as opposed to being security teams that just get in the way of everybody doing their job.
Yeah, remove the friction, allow business to happen freely and openly, look for the outliers, investigate and respond appropriately. So instead of trying to do true data loss prevention, which is impossible, really, unless you lock down everything, then you, from a business perspective, really can't function. It's really about detecting where those risks are, and then going out and doing the forensics and the investigation to go get that data back, which is a different model than most of the data security players.
It's really interesting because, and it also recognizes that you treat insiders differently than you treat outsiders. Because when a piece of malware comes into your organization, your response as a security organization is, we're not worried about intent. We're going to whack it. We're going to isolate it. We're going to shut it down. And speed is really important because we don't want it to propagate. Insider risk doesn't propagate. And so the speed with which you respond can be in hours and days. It doesn't have to be in minutes and seconds. So you can get to intent. You can understand the context. You can, we call it empathetic investigations, a term that most security people laugh at because they're like, empathetic. And that's not my job. It's like, actually, in an insider environment, it is your job. Yeah. If you're going to interview the CFO of the company, this is another thing that happened 2 weeks ago. CFO publicly shared a document called Restructuring Plan, one of our customers. Do you think the CFO meant to do that? No. That's an example of unintentional insider risk, but how you handle that as a security person is very different than how you would handle if there was a piece of malware on that machine.
Right.
So it is a different problem. It is in a part of the organization that the security team needs to really rethink and relearn how it responds in this environment.
Yeah. Key use cases seem to be things like source code protection, obviously intellectual property protections, and other sensitive documents are like key use cases of why people would deploy this kind of technology, right?
Well, it's one of those spaces where people are like, oh, do I just need to protect my executive team? That's the first, they often ask that. And then it's like, no. Listen, everyone in your company has critical information that you wouldn't want at your competitors. So source code is the thing we see growing the most today. Software developers moving their source code from one to the other. The old UEBA thing was, if we see a salesperson with source code, then we want to create an alert. It's like, what is a salesperson going to do with source code? They don't even know what it is. They don't know what it looks like.
Right.
What you're really worried about is the person that wrote that source code, taking that source code with them.
Right.
And because they know how it works, they know what to do, and they can use it. So source code exfiltration, salespeople have a tendency to take their data out of Salesforce.com.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've actually at Code 42, we've built an integration with Salesforce cloud to cloud, and then we correlate that with what we see on the endpoint. And so if a salesperson downloads a file from Salesforce but doesn't put it on their trusted device, say they download it to their untrusted device, then we will see that. We're the only player in the industry that can see that and then create an alert on that. That's been hugely valuable for organizations. In my own company, while we were alpha in that product, just burning that product in, I caught one of our own employees moving data who was departing our company, going to another company in the security industry, taking data out of Salesforce, putting it on a personal device. And we ended up firing that employee. We got that data back. We actually put the new company on notice so they couldn't use that data.
Right.
So, we see this even in our own company. We see this kind of thing. So the other thing I want to share, it's kind of one people don't think of, is it used to be we thought of recruiters as sort of the lowest people on the totem pole in an organization. But there's a pretty famous case out there right now with Tesla where one of their competitors hired away the Tesla recruiters. The Tesla recruiters had all of the comp information for their own, for the Tesla jobs.
Oh, wow.
And the concept was, hey, if we hire the recruiters away and they bring all that comp information of who makes what, then we can cherry pick some of their best people.
Oh, wow.
Now in that scenario, Tesla is not a customer of Code 42. In that scenario, it was a failure of their security team because they didn't discover it when it happened. They discovered it a year later, and now they're in a lawsuit and dealing with all that kind of stuff. But I bring that one up because what you see there is that everyone in your organization has data that you would not want to have leave the organization,
right?
And in particular when they're departing.
Yeah.
So that's really when we see the biggest thing. We also see a lot of problematic things happen when people join an organization. Because if everyone's taking data when they leave, and about 60% of people admit that they took data from their last job, where are they taking it to? They're bringing it into your organization.
Right.
And that puts a lot of risk on your organization if you hire somebody new and they bring a bunch of data from one of your competitors.
Right.
So we also protect against that.
Great use cases. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate you having me.
If anybody wants to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/code42. Stay tuned. We have more interviews coming up.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're enjoying RSA Week so far. My name is Bill Brenner. I am VP of Content Strategy here for Security Weekly and Cyber Risk Alliance, and it is my pleasure to be here this morning with Matt Mosley, Chief Product Officer and CISO at Pixum. Welcome.
Thanks, Bill.
So I'm excited to have this conversation because we just got done collaborating with Pixum on 2 ebooks. One, a buyer's guide for anti-phishing, and the other, a survival guide. And so all of this information that we've traded back and forth is still very fresh in my head. But let me start. So with phishing, the focus tends to be on what comes in by email and all of the social engineering tricks that are tied to that. And indeed, we just did a research report on the topic and found that for a lot of enterprises, that focus is still there. But your focus is on what I see as not the next big thing, but the thing that's here now and people are making the adjustment. And that is phishing tactics that are coming by way of the browser. So talk to me a bit about how you've worked to differentiate from other anti-phishing technologies, and to really focus on these newish challenges coming from the browser.
Sure, Bill. Happy to cover that. So, as you know, 91% of all data breaches start with phishing. So that's the initial vector most people get in, and it's because people are vulnerable. It's very easy to send a phishing email or a message through text or something else and get people to click on a link. And once you have access to their credentials, you can then get further into the network. What we found is that while this was historically mostly an email problem, and it's very easy to just reach out to lots of people and send them the same link and hope someone clicks on it. These attacks have become much more targeted. And as they've become much more targeted, they've also focused on other sources. So we see data breaches occurring through fish that originates in Slack, business collaboration apps. We see it through, obviously, text messages are a huge problem now. And if you know the individual you're going after, you can craft something very targeted, very specific that is coming in through an avenue that they trust. Typically we don't trust links in email quite so much, but, people trust links through other applications they're used to using. And when they click that link and open it, it can still very easily, in the moment, fool somebody into thinking this is real, and all of a sudden you've given away the keys to the kingdom. And so what we've done at Pixum is develop a solution that lives in the browser, which is where people live and work most days. We spend most of our time in a web browser using SaaS applications. Yeah. And that's where these attacks are actually occurring. And so our technology actually stops these data breaches before they can occur as people open that link and click that link, and we analyze it in real time and stop the phish there.
So, I think of my own use everywhere where I would be targeted. So I'm on Slack. There's Discord. There's any number of programs that have a chat function for any number of websites that I visit on a daily basis. From your experience working with customers, where is the biggest vector right now in your mind? Is it phishing messages that are coming in from LinkedIn? Is it?
Yeah, so it depends obviously on your industry and what sort of work you do, but I'll tell you, overall, it's text. It really is text right these days, and that's why we just launched Pixum Mobile last week, our new product, which covers text and other use cases on mobile. A lot of these text messages look very real. Look like they're from someone who you would expect to get a text from. Saying, for example, hey, your account is past due, click here and go and pay your bill. And you think, well, I better do that, right? That's important. You click it. It looks like your utility company, but it's actually not. And they're trying to steal your credentials. Or log into Salesforce and follow up on your case, right? And then they get your Salesforce password. Now they have access to all of your information on your customer database. So text is the biggest one, I think, but we do see a lot of Slack in the corporate environment. You mentioned Discord. We've seen a lot of Coinbase and things like that being attacked over Discord. And, if you think about that, if you lose that money, you're never getting it back, right? So if someone's able to get into your Bitcoin, steal your Bitcoin, you're in big trouble. And so, Discord is an avenue for more. It's more, not as corporate so much, but there's a lot of attacks happening on Discord as well.
And in the reports that we've just collaborated on, one of the themes is the idea of targeting the executives, the CEO.
That's right.
So talk to me a bit about that, some of the types of messages.
Well, you did mention LinkedIn. So we've had several years at RSA here where there's been a rash of people being attacked through LinkedIn-based phish at RSA. And usually it comes in either through text message more recently or historically through email saying, hey, this executive who you met at the conference wants to connect with you, click here to accept. And we're used to the idea that if we open the application and do it ourselves, of course, our credentials are stored in the application. But if we click that out of email, it's going to ask us for username and password. So that's not unexpected. So people put in the username and password, and now their LinkedIn account's been taken. And that happens. That'll happen at Black Hat. It'll happen at any conference that occurs this year, security conference. But in terms of executives, it's very easy to find out enough information about somebody to reach out to them directly through whatever application you do it. And once you know who that person is, as we all know, privacy doesn't exist in this world, right? So, they can find enough about you to target you very personally. And then, I think part of the challenge here too is this is a very emotional thing, phishing in general, because we're all sort of taught, you're not supposed to click those links. You're not supposed to put in those creds. So people that do get taken advantage of ultimately feel to some extent like they're responsible for it, like it's their fault, and I think that's part of the stigma we have to erase as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about what Pixum does at the high level. Now take us deeper.
Sure.
Talk about how the how the plugin works. If you're a customer, what you're seeing, how this integrates into the daily user experience for them.
Yeah. So I talked about the idea of point of click, and when you think about, you open a link in a browser, that link renders on your screen, and then you interact with that site. Well, prior to that happening, our plugin actually analyzes that content to say, does this look suspicious? And so we do that by actually sending up an image of the content to our cloud, of the login page effectively you're being asked for. So, our product actually operates on pixels on the screen. We're not looking at HTML. We're not looking at that level. We're looking at what's being rendered to the user, and is that something that looks like a real site but isn't? So from the user experience point of view, I click a link, I open it, and if it's malicious, I'll immediately have my browser pop up with a big red box that says, this isn't who it looks like. Here's why. It'll explain all the information. So there's a little training element there too, and then it'll prevent the user from ultimately entering their information and having it stolen. The hope there is by explaining, not just stopping it, but explaining why and what they're seeing, it helps them understand, what to look for the next time and help avoid it.
Yep. So let's talk about, helpful tips.
Sure.
And indeed, one of the reports we just collaborated on is a survival guide. So you've explained very well how what you do works, what the user experience is. Based on the types of phishing techniques that we've been talking about for the last few minutes, what are some of the best practices that you would share with, beyond just the clients, to anyone watching this?
Yeah.
When you're looking at the nuances of the phishing techniques today.
I think inherently we tend to trust things that look like they come from people who we know, right? And we don't tend to give them a second look. And unfortunately, when you're talking about technology, you can't always trust what you see. So, really giving it that extra look and saying, does this look real? Does this something I would expect to receive from this person? If you're in a browser, just paying attention to the URL you're going to, making sure it's actually what you think it is. Those are basic things that can help, and just being aware generally. I think about it like, if you're traveling in a country where, maybe things like pickpockets are common, right? You pay a little bit more attention when you're out on the street to what's going on around you. And, you're looking for scenarios where there could be risk. Same thing has to be true in cyber. You have to, ultimately realize that it's a dangerous world out there. And, there are people who would love to, take advantage and steal information, money, whatever else they can get their hands on. And so, you have to have that ultimate posture. It's just say zero trust as a person, right? There's this zero trust concept in computing, but I have zero trust in my phone, and you have to look at it that way because that risk is always there.
Yeah, a funny little story. So I'm targeted regularly,
I'm sure,
as a lot of us are, with getting a text message. Hi, it's from the CEO.
Yep.
Sorry, I missed you. I'm in a meeting, but I know that this individual would never contact me from there.
Right.
It would be from email. So but it just goes to show that even if it looks obvious, the bad guys are going to try it anyway, because all they need is one person.
That's right.
Who is in a rush and looking at 10 different windows to click on it.
That's the old adage about information security: is the good guys have to be right every time, the bad guys only have to be right once. You know, and so they can send out enough volume, someone will click on it, someone will make the mistake.
So let me switch gears a little bit and talk about the experience of the week. So this is the first RSA back in 2 years.
Yeah.
My last business trip before this was RSA 2020.
So was mine.
Right as things were starting to get interesting. As you walk around the show floor and you look at all the booths and the different topics that are covered and where they all fit into the phishing equation, what are some of the thoughts, any takeaways or ahas that you've gathered so far?
I think there's been some pretty big stories this year about protection of the browser in general, as the browser being the new kind of horizon, of security, right? That's something that's sort of been out in the Wild West. We haven't really paid that much attention to it. But so many attacks do target the browser, and we've had some big announcements this year around that. So we're glad to hear that. We believe that protecting the browser is obviously critical. It's where Pixum lives, and we've obviously been aware of this problem for a while. So I'm glad to see that there's more people getting engaged in the idea of the browser being that last line of defense. Lots of mobile products, obviously, and that's becoming more and more important as people do most of their work on their mobile devices in many cases. And in terms of phishing in general, I think the idea that historically there's been this idea that threat intelligence is one of the ways to stop phishing, and I think people are starting to realize that threat intelligence is great if it's something you've seen before, but if it's the first time you've seen it, it's not going to help you.
That actually leads into the next question that I plan to ask, which is, without naming names, because I'm not into shaming, but are you seeing any approaches being promoted that you think is taking people down the wrong path?
Well, listen, I think there's a lot of great vendors here at the show, right? And we're not here to shame anybody for any of their messaging or story. I think a show like this that's this big, it's very hard to stand out and differentiate. When people are walking by, looking at the booths and seeing what you do, so you see a lot of the same language. You really got to understand what the products do and what you're looking at when you walk the show floor. But I think from a phishing point of view, the only way you're going to be able to stop phishing is by detecting targeted attacks that are going after people. The mass market stuff that's hitting millions of people, that's going to be on everybody's block list in 5 minutes. And so the reality is it's easy to stop because you've seen it before all over the place. And so there's plenty of products that will do that. But that's not what you have to worry about. What you have to worry about is the attack that's just targeting you. And there's far fewer products that will actually stop that kind of phishing attack because, it's harder. It's hard work. I mean, I know our CEO is going to talk with you guys later, get a bit more in depth about our technology and how it actually works, but it's not easy stuff, to stop these targeted attacks. And so I would just say, from a phishing point of view, again, I'm a big believer in defense in depth, right? So you need to have all of these layers. And so filtering out the easy stuff is important, but then you've got to stop the hard stuff. And that's a little bit harder to do.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Any parting thoughts?
No, I it's been a great show for us. We've definitely enjoyed being back here at RSA for the first time, as you said, in several years, and I'm glad to see the industry is still thriving. And check out our website. We'd love to hear from anyone who has any would like to look at our products and go from there.
Great, been a pleasure.
Thanks, Bill. Enjoyed talking with you.